Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Taking Control of Your Diabetes podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Dr. Jeremy Pettis, joined as always by my good friend and colleague,
Dr. Steve Edelman.
You know, I always say joined as always, but it's not true. You know, sometimes we're together and sometimes we're not, but obviously I enjoy when we get to do these together.
Jeremy, we're always together in spirit.
Exactly. So, as usual, we're coming to you with a really, fun and interesting topic and an important topic. So this is alcohol and diabetes. So as I always kind of mention at the start of these things, usually is why are we talking about this topic? Well, alcohol is, something a lot of people drink alcohol, and listen, it has effects on your blood sugar. And not only does it affect your blood sugar, but it obviously impairs your judgment, so can make managing diabetes tasks difficult when you are drinking. And it's something that people generally feel very uncomfortable bringing up with a provider, or even there's limited information online. So this is all about how to kind of, if you are going to consume alcohol, how to really do it safely with diabetes.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, besides doing it safely, you want to do it so it doesn't wreck your blood sugars. And, there's pina coladas, which we'll talk about on one end of the spectrum, and hard alcohol on the other. And, we realize that there are a lot of people out there that don't condone drinking, and we respect that. But there are probably more people that do like to drink alcohol socially, hopefully, and above, 21. And we want to help people do it safely. And that's what's missing in the diabetes education classes across America. They just say, don't drink.
Exactly. And before I forget, I have to specifically mention, I think probably one of our most viewed, if not the most viewed video that we have, which is called Alcohol and Diabetes, Do They Mix? And if you follow us at TCOID, we do these challenges. We've done the piece of pizza challenge where we ate pizza and had 3 pieces, I think, had to stay in range. We did donuts. Steve ate 3 donuts. I ate 3 donuts, try to keep our blood sugars in range. And then famously did this video on alcohol where I drank 3 16-ounce IPAs, Pliny the Elder, in 45 minutes. Good Lord. I don't know why we came up with those rules. And Steve drank 3 old fashions. And we talk about, and we do this kind of in real time, how these different types of alcohol affect your blood sugar differently, beer versus hard alcohol. And it is funny as the video goes on that we get intoxicated, but that's also part of the point, that it becomes, you lose your inhibitions, you're thinking about diabetes can kind of go out the window. And importantly, we come back after this, this exercise. I show my blood sugars the next day and talk about what happened and how my blood sugars, behaved overnight, all those kinds of things. So if you haven't seen it, check that video out.
Yeah, and I would just say, once again, we try to do these challenges, not to do them every single day. I don't eat 3 donuts every day, maybe 2. No, but how do you do it safely, and how do you enjoy life, and everything in moderation? And so that's the purpose of all these challenges. And that's so important for people living with diabetes. They want to feel normal and do the things they like to do.
Yeah. So let's get kind of our official disclaimer out of the way, the bad stuff, that clearly drinking large amounts of alcohol can cause all kinds of problems: liver disease, heart disease, pancreatitis, high blood pressure. So the point of this is not, for us to poke fun at, alcoholism by any means. It's that if you are going to drink, how to do it safely.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, here is a statement, Steve. So I think we already kind of know the answer to this, but it says people with diabetes should never drink alcohol. True or false?
Definitely false.
Right. So again, if you don't want to drink, fine. But there's actually specific recommendations, and the American Diabetes Association says that women should drink no more than 1 drink per day, and men should drink no more than 2 drinks a day. These would be men and women with diabetes. And I kind of think of this as you think about everything.
That's sexism.
Well, no, like we say, is there a diabetes diet? Not really. You should eat kind of healthy in moderation, just like anybody should. And when it comes to alcohol, it's kind of the same message, that you should just, do it safely, do it in moderation. But people with diabetes can drink and shouldn't feel like they're, a quote unquote bad diabetic if they have an occasional alcoholic beverage.
And I hate these kind of rules, to be honest. I love the ADA. They give us a lot of good guidelines, but these guidelines are not helpful in real life.
Well, I think it at least opens a door of listen, in some of these societies at least recognize that it's not just a hard no, that people can drink alcohol.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm glad you turned your mind around on that one. So, first of all, what is a drink? Well, there's actual definitions of this. So, a drink is a 12-ounce beer or a 5-ounce glass of wine or basically a shot's worth of alcohol. So, hard alcohol, glass of wine, beer. And I always tell people, for men, let's say that you can have 2 drinks a day. These aren't like rollover minutes. You can't like acquire them. If I didn't drink Monday and Tuesday, then I can go like hog wild on Wednesday. Like
I haven't had a drink for 2 weeks.
yes,
We wait till
so you
tonight.
get 28. So when it comes to what we need to think about alcohol, this is why it's slightly a complicated topic, because if you ask a bunch of doctors or providers, what does alcohol do to your blood sugars? They'll say, oh, it lowers it, or maybe some will say it raises it. And it really is not that simple, because we have to think about multiple things when it comes to alcohol. So first of all, we have to think about the calories. That it's just a great way to gain weight. If anybody wants to gain weight, you can pack a lot of calories in alcohol. So we have to be mindful of that. Then the carbs in alcohol. So the carbs in your alcohol will obviously raise your blood sugar. And as we'll get into over and over again, depending on what you drink, there's a wide array of how many carbs might be in that specific drink.
And I should say, on the other end of the spectrum, you drink hard alcohol with no carbs, that could eventually lead to hypoglycemia.
Exactly.
So, you can go either way.
So exactly. So the carbs in the alcohol, if you're drinking a pina colada, let's say, will obviously raise your blood sugar, but the alcohol itself tends to lower your blood sugar. So those things can have offsetting effects. And like you just mentioned, Steve, you're drinking a pina colada, your blood sugar is going to go through the roof. You're going to go high. If you're just sipping on bourbon all night, you might go low. And that's why you can't just say alcohol does X. It depends a lot on what you're drinking.
Yeah. And I would just say this, one step back in terms of preparing to drink alcohol. You would have gotten to this anyway, but being able to measure your blood sugar and tell your friends that you're with, and hopefully you have a close enough relationship with your significant other partner, man or woman, that you have diabetes, and these are the kind of things to look out for. And continuous glucose monitor is probably the best tool to make sure you don't get into trouble.
So these are some of my tips kind of at the end, but having a CGM is one of them, and having a drinking buddy is what I call it, is another one. Like somebody that knows that you have diabetes, that you're going to be, consuming alcohol.
But if they drink alcohol with you, then and they're wasted, how could they help you?
You just got to get drunk faster than they do. So, all right, so let's go through some kind of popular alcohols, if you will. So we're going to start with beer. And, and beer in of itself is the category that probably varies the most in terms of how many carbs or calories are in specific beers. So just starting with a light beer, like an Amstel Light, these get kind of a lot of press as like, kind of weight friendly, et cetera. When it comes to calories and carbs, do you want to take a guess, Steve, of how many calories or carbs are in an Amstel Light?
Yeah, and I was just going to mention, too, I had a friend come over that was on the keto diet, and he brought over a 6-pack of Michelob Light, and apparently it was the lightest beer he could find. I would say...
Well, before you answer, that's a good point, because something I forgot to mention is that there's some loophole, I don't know what it is, but beer and alcohol do not have to have nutritional labels on them.
Yeah.
So a lot of beers, I challenge you to try to find it. You won't. So as people living with diabetes, you actually have to actively go and look up this information. Google your favorite beer, hard alcohol, whatever, to find this. And you can also find lots of discrepancies. If you just Google Amstel Light online, it's kind of all over the place sometimes. You're not quite sure what you're putting in your body, which is problematic.
That is strange.
Yeah.
I bought some of this spiced eggnog from Costco. It's spiked with alcohol, and it tastes like it has 4,000 calories. I couldn't find the nutrition label. Well, I would say with a light beer, you're probably going 50, 60 calories for 12 ounces.
Yeah, so, depending on, 90 to 100, maybe down to that low for Michelob Ultra, I'm not sure, or light, but about 5 grams of carbs in these light beers. So they actually are, pretty carb friendly when you're, drinking these light beers. So that's...
Since you're asking me face the nation type of questions,
Mm-hmm.
how many calories in a Guinness, 12-ounce Guinness?
Well, that's my next thing I got here, because I know this is your favorite topic, and I know you better than you know yourself. And so Guinness, people think, okay, it's a heavy beer, it's really flavorful, that's got to be packing a ton of calories. It's actually only, which is small for a beer, 126 calories, 10 grams of carbs. And I know, Steve, you like to say this. This is probably the most flavorful but lower carb beer.
It's the lowest calorie regular beer.
Yeah.
Not a light beer. And you know what? You're right. You look at it, it looks like mud. It's so dark, but it's a great beer to drink if you have diabetes. Can you pass me the third bottle for me?
So now we're moving up the spectrum. So light beer, 5 grams of carbs. You got Guinness. That was, what did we say? 10 grams of carbs. But there's been this kind of revolution in beer for, high, hops, high alcohol, these IPAs, double IPAs. And in general, the more alcoholic you get, the more carbs and more calories you have. So I always kind of credit San Diego as leading this IPA launch, but other cities would probably argue with that, but they're not here, so beat it. But anyways, when you look at some of these IPAs, they can be, 220 to almost 300 calories per 12 ounces. That's a lot of calories in a beer.
That's a tremendously amount of calories.
It's a ton. And then you can have 20 to 25 grams of carbs in one of these IPAs. And then when I tell people that's half of a Coca-Cola or Pepsi, something like that, that's a lot of carbs. So clearly, if you're drinking that, it's going to raise your blood sugar a lot. And so we've moved from this light beer to these kind of high, alcohol beers. And again, even within just beer, it makes a big difference what you're drinking. So figure out what you like to drink. Oh, I only drink Stella's or whatever. Just Google it, see how many carbs it is, and you can get an idea of what you might need to take if you're on insulin to kind of cover those carbs. And we'll get to that.
Well, Jeremy, a can of Coke is 170 calories.
Yeah. So it's more calories, but a can of Coke's probably like 35, 40 grams of carbs.
Yeah, you're right, because beer has other things in it.
Yeah. So, in general, I say if you, do these carb servings, one beer is about one carb serving, 15 grams of carbs is a general estimate for, a beer. And again, there's a wide array there. So, and this is tough because I like beer. But I really have kind of shied away from it recently because it wrecks your blood sugars.
Well, you like the double IPAs as well. And when we had that alcohol challenge, you drank like the 18-ounce Pliny the Elder
bottles.
bottles.
Keep getting bigger. I don't know how big they were. They're 16, 18. They're big bottles.
They're 18 ounces.
Okay.
Yeah, and you drank 3 of those in 45 minutes. My stomach couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
But you downed them.
Steve made a bed for me. We had a little sleepover. It was nice. So, all right. So beer, we're going to leave that behind for right now. So what about wine? And I don't have to put you on the spot here, Steve, but in general with wine, it actually is much more calorie and carb friendly. So if I'm just talking about diabetes, wine is much better than beer in terms of the effects on blood sugars. In general, a glass of wine around 120 calories, 5 grams of carbs or so. And it doesn't matter much if it's a red wine or a white wine. I mean, certainly if you drink these like very sweet dessert wines, that'll have more carbs in it. But for a typical glass that people drink, Chardonnay, a Cab, whatever, not too many carbs.
Yeah. And wine is one of the best drinks people with diabetes can have. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you like wine. If you don't like wine, we're going to talk about other choices as well. So it's an awesome choice. Doesn't have to be a fancy French wine.
Right.
All the different types. So it's about the same. You're right. And, people sip wine. They don't guzzle it either.
Yeah.
And taking it in slower also helps. Little cheese and salami go a long way as well.
And I'm just thinking people are listening. They're probably thinking, how many times have you been in a party, and someone's been like, oh, do you want a glass of wine or beer? And said like, oh, you have diabetes. You probably shouldn't have that, right?
Oh, you should. I've given a couple black eyes at those parties. Like, are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah. It is frustrating, but it's good to have this information and tell people, no, like, again, you should be able to drink just like anybody else should, in moderation. So what about hard alcohol? If you just took a shot of your favorite bourbon, Steve, how many carbs would be in that?
I would say none.
Yeah, you're right. 0 grams. So this always blows people's mind when I say this, but in terms of the best thing to drink with diabetes, it's hard alcohol. It has 0 carbs in it. Now, the important caveat there is you have to be really careful of what you're mixing with your hard alcohol. It's not a ton of people out there that just sip, vodka all day long. I mean, there's obviously a number of them, but most people tend to mix their drinks with something. So I have here, my slide on a pina colada. and just one pina colada, which again is only one shot of rum or so. So the rum doesn't have any carbs, but one pina colada has 526 calories, 61 grams of carbs.
And that's not including the cherry they put on top.
Yeah. And I love pina coladas. I mean, who doesn't? But that is, like a whole meal, a ton of carbs. And so you can see, like, we're getting at that the alcohol in that is actually not the problem. It's all the other, goop you put in there. You actually have a really good low calorie
Pina colada.
mix.
I was just thinking of the Bai soft drink, not soft drinks, but diet drinks, BAI. They have a cocoa fusion, and it's delicious. And it's 10 calories for a huge bottle of it, 10. So you mix that with rum, you put ice in a blender, and you fire it up, and it tastes excellent. And it's about 60 calories total.
And there's always ways to find, favorite drinks and make them lower calorie, lower carb, skinny margaritas, all these kinds of things. So there is hope. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was introduced to bourbon, it was a drink with bourbon and ginger ale. So, ginger ale is just like drinking a Coke. Mm-hmm. So getting diet ginger ale and bourbon is awesome. But as I got more sophisticated, you don't mix a good bourbon with anything. But I do like old fashions. Get the big ice cube, of course. Don't be around me if I go into a nice restaurant and they give it, they make it on crushed ice.
We got to stop there for a second because he's serious. If he orders an old fashioned and it comes out with crushed ice or not a giant ice cube, it is an unpleasant experience to be around. To Steve,
it
just
pisses
say,
me off.
You'll ask some questions like, "What is this?"
Okay, but Jeremy, this is 2023.
I agree with you, but you could just say, "Hey, when you make it, do you mind putting in a big ice cube?" But it's almost like a test. And then when they come back, you just get mad.
No, I somehow forget to ask in a nice restaurant. But anyway.
And I go to the bathroom and then just like.
Yeah, right there in your pants. So in an old fashioned, it's good bourbon, large ice cube, a little bit of simple syrup and some bitters and maybe a cherry or the outside rind of an orange or lime. And I would say this, that I always order it. I say light on the simple syrup because that's just pure liquid syrup, but it's very little, and that's the only thing that has calories. And you drink it slow. You never guzzle an old fashioned.
And the cherries, you mentioned that a number of times in our video.
Yeah, Luxardo cherries. Mm-hmm. They've been soaked in like brandy for 6 months.
Yeah,
they cost a ton. Anyway, that's my drink, and it never wrecks my blood sugars.
Well, I'm going to get to my drink right after this point I wanted to make. So with the pina coladas, 520-something calories, 61 grams of carbs. Just for comparison, a Big Mac, God bless it, McDonald's Big Mac, 550 calories, 46 grams of carbs. So if you're drinking one pina colada, it's more than a Big Mac in terms of carbs. And I'm not saying don't ever have a pina colada. You just got to know like what you're putting into your body. And of course you would bolus if you're going to eat a Big Mac or take insulin, etc. So my favorite drink, while we're on the topic, I've really gravitated towards these hard kombuchas. Kombucha is basically a tea that they can now ferment and make it alcoholic, like 6-7% alcohol. So it's got a decent amount in it.
Name some brands.
Like locally here in San Diego, we have June Shine, Boochcraft, there's Local Roots. And again, this is kind of like the next wave now, I feel like. The IPAs was, that was who had the coolest IPA. Now it's these kombuchas. And when I'm traveling, I'm seeing them more and more. And they have typically 3-4 grams of carbs, and I like them. Same thing with these I'm not as big on, but these seltzers like High Noon and White Claw and stuff, also very, very low carb. So those are very good, like diabetes-friendly options. So there are choices just when it comes to kind of any beverage and ways that you can make it kind of diabetes-friendly.
Those type of drinks are super popular. Every time I go into a supermarket, there's a couple new brands that they're trying to market. And my daughter had a party at my house for her birthday party with a bunch of friends, and they brought in a keg of beer and a keg of June Shine.
Oh, wow.
So it was awesome. That popular, and they finished that off way too fast.
That stuff's not cheap either. So, but I want to get a keg of June Shine. That sounds great. But so anyways, kind of putting this together on the spectrum of how these things might affect your blood sugar. Well, on the far end of kind of the bad area, I guess, I would put foofy drinks like Mai Tais, pina coladas. These high sugary drinks are going to just make your blood sugars go sky high, make you hyperglycemic. You're going to have to take insulin. If you're not on insulin, maybe go for a walk, adjust medications, whatever. So next worst would be these kind of high calorie beers, IPAs, etc. And then things that are kind of blood sugar neutral, I would put wine in that category. And then if you're drinking just kind of straight hard alcohol with low calorie mixers, even Diet Coke, etc., those will tend to lower your blood sugars. So you have this wide array from actually making your blood sugars go low to making them go sky high. So again, knowing what you're drinking is so important.
Well, what kind of recommendations should we give the folks listening on consuming calories and what type of calories? Like if you're out at a bar or a friend's house and you're drinking, more than you usually do, and maybe you're drinking more hard alcohol. What kind of recommendations would
For
you give?
blood sugars?
Yeah, to keep it from dropping
Yeah. So
and the time frame of dropping. Too.
I always tell people, first of all, a couple things. When you are drinking, you're going to have to worry about the carbs in that alcohol for the next couple of hours or whatever. So you're going to have to prepare for that. But the effect of the alcohol itself on lowering your blood sugar is usually delayed. It happens kind of hours later and sometimes overnight. So when people are going into, to drink something at a bar or a party, like you mentioned, I always say that people should always eat something. Drinking on an empty stomach is never a good idea. And make sure you have your CGM. If you are on insulin, you can kind of intentionally under bolus a little bit for the carbs because you know that the alcohol is going to kind of lower your blood sugars a little bit. But if you're really kind of going for it and having a big night out, I always tell people it's safer to be on kind of the higher blood sugar side than lower. Now, I would never tell someone to have their blood sugars be high all night. But if you're having more than, let's say, 3 drinks, then yeah, I would target something 150 to 200 is totally fine to avoid a low. Because here's the situation that we're trying to avoid. You go out, let's say you have 4 or 5 drinks, you're intoxicated. You come home, your blood sugars are high. This is the worst case scenario. Your blood sugars are high. People take a big dose of insulin or medications to lower their blood sugar, and then they go to sleep. And they're sleeping and they're intoxicated, so you don't hear your CGM alarms. You don't kind of respond to a low blood sugar, and that can be a really problematic situation. So you want to make sure that you're being conservative with your blood sugars, particularly overnight. When you're drinking, make sure you have your CGM alarm on, as loud as possible, that somebody's following you. Steve follows my blood sugars. Just last night, I had a low, and you texted me and asked me if I was all right, which I appreciate it. Not alcohol related. But yeah, so those are some tips.
Yeah, and my biggest suggestion is sleep with someone every night because they can save you. And if you have obviously if you're married or a girlfriend or boyfriend, that's so important. I think the things that you can snack on, like if you're at a bar, I wouldn't eat a big old cheeseburger. The stuff's going to sit there, but things like those little pretzels with peanut butter in the middle, or order some bar food, that you can snack on. You want carbs, but you also want some protein and fat that hangs in there, and still acts later on. So even a charcuterie board, if you can order that, cheese, salami, and crackers, it's perfect.
Now, the other recommendation I give people is that if you have any diabetes tasks to do them before you go out, or like you're going to a party or whatever. What I mean by that is, let's say you're on a CGM and it's about to expire. Don't be like, oh, I'll put that off until, midnight tonight, because you're not going to do it. Or you have an infusion set you need to change on your pump. Do that before you go out. Or if you're on basal insulin, take that before you go out, because, you might forget it. So I always say, kind of do things now to protect yourself from drunk you later. Get these kind of like, put yourself in as good a situation as possible, so you don't have to deal with, potentially complicated diabetes tasks when you're intoxicated.
Yeah, and a lot of these sensors have a warm-up time, or even if they don't, they're not that accurate in the very beginning. So doing that stuff early is key. I use the Omnipod with my looping app, and I always try to get the whole 72 hours plus that extra 8 hours. But then when you put it on, you fall asleep, and then you don't hear that little squealing when the thing goes dead. And same with a Dexcom sensor. it takes 2 hours to warm up. The G7 is going to have 30 minutes, so that's going to be an improvement. But waiting those 2 hours is like eternity when you're wasted.
Now, the other thing for people on insulin, I tell them if you're going to have more than 3 drinks, if you're just on basal insulin, you might consider reducing your dose 20% or so that night to avoid a low overnight. The hybrid closed loop pumps have helped a lot because as your blood sugars are dipping, they can turn off insulin and avoid a low. But if you are, again, having a heavier drinking night, something that I've done and I know patients have done is actually put a system like the Tandem Control IQ in exercise mode or the Omnipod 5 or Loop, basically target a slightly higher blood sugar because, again, I'd rather be 150, 160 all night than 50, and so it's another way of kind of trying to target higher blood sugars to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Even doing it 1 or 2 hours before you even have your first drink. And like you said, you have to be able to say, okay, tonight I'm not going to have super tight control.
Right.
And the exercise mode is such an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
The Tandem shoots for a blood sugar of 160 versus 120. And they all go for a higher. So that's a great suggestion.
And the other thing is just a good diabetes rule in general. If you're on insulin, if you have type 1 or type 2, everybody should have glucagon. There's lots of new formulations of glucagon, the Gvoke pen, there's the Baqsimi, and then the older kind of Lilly product that we've had for a long time. But importantly, know where it is and tell somebody else where it is too. So there's no point in you going to sleep and, having a horrible low and then your significant other wakes up and has no idea where the glucagon is. That happens all the time.
Yeah, the other thing is, Jeremy, there is... I've seen a couple articles in the lay literature that if you're drinking, glucagon emergency will not work.
Yeah.
So I asked 3 or 4 experts, including Justin Gregory, who has type 1 and like yourself has a lot of interest in glucagon. And it's a theoretical concern. But in general, if you have glucagon with you, which you should, take it. And if you don't have any response in a short period of time, like 15 minutes, take another one, call paramedics. But I think the instructions that we gave you, if you just pay a little bit of attention, you should not have any problems. And your drinking buddy, they know about your CGM and they know how to use a glucose meter if that's all you got. And I think that's the key is knowing where you're at.
And, we should say real quick, I kind of skipped over this, what alcohol does to lower your blood sugar. And essentially a way of thinking of it is that it kind of poisons the liver a little bit. So the liver can't put out glucose like it normally does. And so it leaves you kind of defenseless to raising your blood sugars. And the time that I really became like profoundly aware of how powerful that is that I do a lot of clinical research, as you know, in type 1 diabetes. And we had this patient that came in for a research study and he was going to be in the unit overnight. And overnight, we take people off their own pumps and actually put them on IV insulin. And I was getting, calls from the nurses all night that they had turned this guy's insulin completely off for hours, but was still going low at type 1, having to give him carbs, etc. And came in the next day and said, what happened? Like, this was so strange that we didn't have you on insulin for 5-6 hours. You're still going low. And he said, well, I was coming in for this study and I was really nervous. So before coming to the unit, I went to Stone Brewery and had like 3 or 4 IPAs and showed up, in the kind of the evening for the study. And so it was the alcohol that was just making him profoundly low all night. And if he wasn't in this, research unit, he could have been in, a tough place.
But the whole thing is, we don't want to get too scientific on this show, but alcohol suppresses the ability of the liver to produce glucose, which occurs normally. But if you have stored glucose, it doesn't prevent that stored glucose from breaking down, entering your bloodstream and saving you. So if you're a marathon runner and you've hit the wall like an hour before you went drinking, there's no stored glucose, you used it all up, that's kind of a theoretical concern.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I think, again, this is such an important topic. We don't want to scare people, but we want to educate them. And with the right tools and education, knock on wood that you and I never had any problems. We're not like heavy drinkers, but, we enjoy a good drink. And it's important to know the effects of alcohol so you can stay safe and educate others, family members on, how to help you with this process also. So.
Yeah, it's a taboo topic that not as much as the sex topic, which we have done a podcast on. But, alcohol is tough to talk about, especially with your parents and other people that may judge you.
Yeah. Seriously, right after this, I'm taking Steve out for a drink, and specifically going to a place that I know has large ice cubes. There's not going to be a scene because we're not invited back several places in San Diego. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Hope you enjoy this. Share this with your friends. Do all the podcast stuff. Keep following us. We really enjoy doing this. Love hearing your feedback, and thanks for listening.
Cheers.
Cheers.